Hey, welcome back to the Métropole Grid. My name is Andre. Thanks so much for tuning in. Today, we got the next video in our System Gateway Deck Building 101 series. And in this video, we'll be focusing on some gameplay where we finally play our corporation deck that we've built, our haas-bioroid precision design deck. Now, in the last video, we played our Zahya deck against our good friend Patrick online in our browser on a website called jinteki.net that allows you to play Netrunner against friends and people you meet online. Now, we're doing something different here. We're on a totally different website, and if you're a newer player getting into System Gateway, I really think this is a website you might want to know about. This is called Chiriboga, and it's a community-made website put together by bobtheuberfish that allows you to play mostly System Gateway Netrunner online in your browser. However, you don't play against people online, you exclusively play against the Chiriboga AI bot opponent. This is an absolutely fantastic tool. And if you just want to have a browser way to quickly pick up and play a game, whatever speed, whatever confidence you want, you will always have an opponent here that plays at a relatively okay level, which is a fantastic way to get into the game, get more reps in, and get comfortable with the deck, the overarching game, and again, give you the confidence that you need to hopefully eventually go online and play on jinteki.net. Now, the website is not just Chiriboga. The URL is slightly more complicated. It's technically chiriboga.sifnt.net.au. I'll have a link to that in the description of the YouTube video, but if you just do a search for Chiriboga Netrunner, this should come up. Now, how this works, mind you, when you open it up, at the top, there's technically a Learn to Play section that can teach you the basics of a Netrunner. I haven't run through this myself, but it just goes through the Null Signal Games Learn to Play guide, which is fantastic and shows you actual examples. Now, otherwise, the 4 buttons on the left side of the screen, the Runner tutorial and Advanced deck and the Corp tutorial and Advanced deck, if you hit those buttons, it just plays the Catalyst versus the Syndicate deck, either the basic or the Advanced deck that we've already played before, and you can just play that as much as you want against the Chiriboga bot. The next 2 buttons, those are the ones that we care about. It's the Runner deck building in System Gateway or the Corp deck building in System Gateway. This, once you open this, and we will in a second, allows you to put together a deck through cards in System Gateway. It's a deck builder. You can also import a deck that you've built on Netrunner DB, that's what we're going to be doing. And then once you've selected your deck, you get to play against a bot, which will also be exclusively playing System Gateway. We'll be doing that in a second. Now, the final 2 buttons, these were actually added later after Chiriboga launched, and they allow you to do deck building and get games in against the Chiriboga bot. But not only can you play with System Gateway, you can play with System Update 2021. Now, System Update is another product that Null Signal Games has released, which contains about 80 cards that supports all of the major 7 factions. It's a really great product that opens up the card pool in some pretty obvious ways. Now, while I do recommend going on Chiriboga and playing around with System Update, I just want to say as a bit of a caveat that System Update might not be my next recommendation for the next product to pick up in your Netrunner journey. Normally it would be. However, as of December 2024, where this video is being recorded, System Update is going to be leaving both the standard and the startup card pool. It will be rotating in under 3 months. We're expecting a new product soon called Dawn. That's the code name so far. That will be dropping in Q1 of 2025. And when that does come out, it will replace System Update in just about all organized play. That is relatively soon. So if you're looking to pick up some more Netrunner cards that will allow you to interact with organized play for the next while, I don't think System Update is very obviously the next thing I would recommend if you have a limited budget. I would probably recommend picking up something like the Borealis cycle or the Liberation cycle. I think those are also fantastic products. So while it's important to keep in mind that you can proxy cards at any level of organized play, so you don't technically have to buy any Netrunner cards, if you're looking to spend some money on getting some more Netrunner cards to build a collection that will allow you to participate in organized play for the next couple of years, System Update is probably not my first choice because you only got 3 more months. But otherwise, that's not going to matter. Let's just dive into some deck building and import our deck and get into some games. Now, same caveats we're going to put at the top of every other video we've done in the series. If you have any questions about what's going on here, please don't hesitate to ask in the YouTube comments. And if you want to take a second to drop a like on the video, if you appreciate content like this, it really does help the channel grow. Awesome. And with that out of the way, let's dive into some gameplay. We want to be playing our precision design deck against the Chiriboga AI bot opponent. So we want to be playing the Corp side. So we're going to go to this button here that says Corp Deck Building System Gateway Only. And very cool. When you open up this page, it's going to pick a random identity and it'll just randomly build you a legal deck using the cards in System Gateway. Notice here, it's a 44 card deck, just like we recommend. It's spending all 15 of its influence and it's on 19 agenda points. I know we said this in our 1-on-1 series. We highly recommend playing 18 agenda points. 18 is a fair bit better than 19, but it does build you an entirely random deck, which is kind of sick if you just want to play this. Now at the top, you can pick your identity, and otherwise you can just hit the randomize button and eventually it will build you the best possible deck in System Gateway, which is pretty slick. Now, otherwise, if you want to do your deck building on Chiriboga, you can. You can do that by just changing the numbers. These are all just text box. So if I hit a 2, it'll warn me that our deck is illegal. And if you click on the copies, it removes copies from your deck. So eventually you can build a legal deck that way. However, we don't just want to build our deck here. We already know what deck we want to play. And that is because we built that in our 101 series on Netrunner DB. And luckily, it's really easy to import decks from Netrunner DB. So in another tab, I have our 101 System Gateway Precision Design deck. If you haven't built this yourself, I'll have it linked in the description below. But all you want to do is once you view the deck, if you go to the export tab and export into jiteki.net format, it'll give you this plain text format and you just want to copy this. So all we'll do is Control A to select all, Control C to copy, and then we'll go back to Chiriboga. Now, a very important first step is make sure you've chosen your identity first. In theory, if you forget to do this, you might have to import the deck twice. But if we go to Precision Design to change our identity, then we go to this list, we Control A to select all of it, and then we just paste on top of it. It will replace that random deck it gave us with our deck. And we are totally good to go. Notice it'll say 44 cards, 15 influence, 18 agenda points. It is the deck that we've built already. At this point, if we hit play using this deck, we'll be playing this deck, and our opponent, if I'm understanding correctly, will be playing a random runner from System Gateway and a random deck that it has built using the Chiriboga randomizer, which is kind of cool and keeps things exciting and fresh. However, if we want to specifically play against our opponent and have them play the Zahya deck, technically we have to start somewhere different. If we hit exit. So now instead, if we go here to the runner deck builder, it will generate a random runner deck out of System Gateway. And if we want this to be the Zahya deck, if we want to play against the Zahya deck we built in our 101 series, all we would have to do is change this to Zahya and then paste in the deck list from Netrunner DB in here. And instead of play using this deck, all we do is set as opponent. I'm not going to paste the deck in, but if we set as opponent, you say our opponent is Zahya, and then it's up to us to pick our corporation deck, which will change the precision design and go ahead and paste in our PD deck. So if you want to play exactly the Zahya versus PD deck, both of the decks we built, you just have to paste them in here one by one. And then here you'd say play using this deck. Now for this video, we're going to keep it random, which might be exciting. So we're going to import our precision design deck and we're just going to play against a random Chiriboga deck. So we go to corporation deck building. Our identity has already been chosen for us randomly, and we're just going to paste in our deck. And then we're going to hit play using this deck. All right, so we got into the game and our opponent randomly drawn was Dao Salonga. This is the Shaper. You might not have seen this before, but Dao has a really fun, interesting ability. Whenever an agenda is scored or stolen, you may swap 2 installed pieces of ice. So no matter what happens before the game ends, this should trigger a couple times. And now the idea is that if we have our good ice on our remote server and bad ice on R&D or archives or HQ, the ice gets swapped. So to play around this, it's kind of tricky. The big thing you want to do is just make sure you don't put ice on the table that isn't good ice. So if you want to put a white space that's broken for 1 credit for the buzzsaw, eventually you have to understand that white space will end up on the remote server. And that's obviously not good for you when you need to score agendas in your remote server. So when we play against Dao, we want to make sure that we are not icing up any servers that are not incredibly important. And as much as possible, we should be only installing our really good ice. Now, otherwise, welcome to Chiriboga. The Chiriboga UI is incredibly charming. It represents itself more like you're actually playing with your cards fan. And anytime that you hover over a card, it'll give you the full text and the full art. Now, all our important abilities, credits, cards in hand, clicks are all displayed underneath the corporation and the runner name. And here it's asking us to mulligan. Now, one thing I did before the game starts, if you go here to the menu, I'm going to hit slower AI and that'll just slow the AI down so it's more easy to tell what it's doing on its turn. There will be a history on the right side of the screen that you can hover over here to see what's happened if you ever miss what the runner did on their turn, but this should make it a bit easier to watch, I think. Now here we have to decide whether we mulligan, and our hand has 2 agendas. It's not fantastic, as much as they are pretty good agendas. We have an ice that is not amazing on turn 1 because the runner might not have installed cards and it's an expensive piece of ice. We generally want something that ends the run in the early game to either protect our Nico, our Regolith, or an agenda. And we do at least have a hedge fund. Now, a good thing with this hand is it's a sprint, so we can make this hand a better hand. But if that's the case, I think we're just going to mulligan in here and assume that we're going to get a hand that has fewer agendas and maybe a bit better ice. That's not bad. We have an early Nico campaign. We do have 1 big agenda, but we have money and a cheap end the run ice. That's not too bad. And we just drew into a Brawn. How Chiriboga works is pretty charming. Anytime that you want to do one of the basic actions, well, you can always click here to purge, which removes virus counters. Obviously, it doesn't matter here. If you want to get credits, you just click on the credit button. If you want to draw cards, you just click on your deck. It's meant to kind of replicate more the in-person play, which is quite charming. So for instance, if I want to install this Brawn, I don't just click on it. I have to click and drag it and basically put it where you would put it when you're playing Netrunner, which I do think is quite charming. So now we have to figure out what we want to do for our first turn. So we want to get our money up. So hedge fund's important. And we also want to protect our Nico campaign because for 2 credits, the runner should trash this. We also want to get our brawn on the table as soon as possible. And that's because our deck just has send a messages like the one we have in hand. So if the runner ever touches the send a message, we want to make sure we have an expensive piece of ice on the table that we can res for free, which will be quite nice. So here we can use white space on the remote server. It's an end the run. If the runner face checks into it, they probably lose 3 credits, but that might be the nice way that we protect our Nico campaign. The other idea is that we put the white space on HQ and put the brawn on the remote server. Again, at the end of the day, Dow is going to just move our ice around, so we can't be too precious about it. So the question is whether we push our Nico campaign out turn 1. Now, I don't think we will because I want to slow down slightly. I want to make sure we have the brawn on the table in case something bad happens to the send a message. So I'll put that on the remote server. I'll put the white space on HQ and I'll just do a hedge fund this turn. Because if we don't play the hedge fund this turn and Dow runs and forces us to res our ice, we probably won't be able to play the hedge fund next turn. So we'll start with the hedge fund. We just click and drag it to the table. Plays hedge fund. That's cute. It shows us our clicks and our credits. We're going to put the white space, I think, on HQ for now because we want to keep that out. We're going to put the brawn on the remote server because that's where we're going to plan to push our Nico campaign in the near future. Again, R&D is wide open. That's fine. It is what it is. It's only a 1 in 5 for that to be an agenda. We'll see if Dow opens up with a jailbreak, but you have to take those risks. And now we'll see how the runner plays. And we can't pause at any point in time. They're just going to fly through. So click one jailbreak on R&D. That's maybe the worst case. Again, this is the card you're familiar with. It runs R&D and then it sees 2 cards and draws a card. So that's just going to be a bunch of free accesses. So successful run trigger, they get a card. They get a seed 2 cards. They're trashing a Managarm for 3 credits off the top. That's pretty expensive for them. We don't mind that at all. And they seed the second card. No steal, no trash. And very importantly, if a card is known to the opponent, it'll put a little eyeball on it to remind you, which I think is a really nice thing to keep in mind. Looks like we're just drawing up. And last click, I think we're playing Creative Commission to gain 4 credits. So bouncing back up with the 7. And we're going to draw the card our opponent knows here. That's the Chiriboga AI. It flies through its turn, which is quite nice. It doesn't take too long. This is also on the slow mode. If you don't put on the slow mode here, it plays way faster than that, which if you're just trying to get games in and reps in, I'd recommend that. All right, so the top of R&D is unknown. We have a Palisade, which ends the run. We'd rather have that on a remote server. And here, we don't really want to push out or send a message because it's expensive. I think we'd rather get the Nico campaign working for us, and then eventually we'll put the Anoetic and then maybe push out the send a message. So icing up R&D, I don't have a huge reason to do that. I don't like putting Palisade on R&D because if the runner runs it, I don't want to spend 3 credits to stop them from touching a 1 in 5 card. They've already played the jailbreak. I don't think they have another jailbreak. So for now, we want the Nico on the remote server, and we probably want the Palisade in front of the brawn just to do an end the run. That's going to be 2 of our clicks. So the question is, what are we going to do with our last click? And you want to plan your turn before you spend your turn, especially for the corporation. So if you're ever going to draw a card, which here I think we might draw a card, hopefully find another defensive upgrade, a seamless launch, another piece of ice, we're going to draw first. And we do that by just dragging the card into our hand. That's Regolith. I'm glad we drew that. That's a faster economy card than the Nico campaign. And this is why you plan your turn like this. So we'll put the Regolith in the remote server. We want to protect that because we want to empty the 15 credits from it over the next 2 turns. And then we'll just protect this even further with the Palisade. Palisade is really nice because it's a much cheaper res. We don't want to pay 6 and the runner clicks through it and trashes our Regolith. We'd rather just pay 3 and then keep the brawn as a nice surprise. Now, importantly, anytime that you install a piece of ice, Chiriboga will ask you, do you want to trash cards or do you want to just do the auto skip and never ask this again? The idea is that whenever you install ice, again, this Palisade will cost us 1 credit because there's already 1 ice in front of the server. If we want to save credits, we can go ahead and drag this brawn back into our bin and it will save credits. So it will always ask you this whenever you're installing ice, if there's other ice on the server. If you just never want to trash your ice, you can hit auto skip, but I want to keep that option open just to remind us that we can save credits in the late to mid game if we need to. Back to the runner, 4 clicks. And again, the history here will tell you what your opponent did if you ever missed anything. So click 1, 5 cards in. We're just touching cards on R&D. Again, R&D is open. I don't mind this. It's a 1 in 5 chance to find an agenda. And if it is a send a message, we get a free brawn. We're happy with that. So this is much worse when the deck is running Penny Shaver or Zahya. Otherwise, oh no, never mind. That was pretty bad. It just happens. Finding our best 3-2 in the deck, it just happens. It was a 1 in 35 and it looks like we're going back. I am honestly fine with this. The runner is spending time touching cards and as opposed to setting up, finding their economy, finding their breakers, and never mind, it's going really bad, really fast. They're on game point, but we have a send a message and this is where we're getting the free brawn resed. Notably too, they could have used their ability to shift the 2 ice. They decided to do that. They decided not to do that and they're just going back on R&D for another single axis. Again, I don't think this is a great way to play Netrunner. We could lose to this, but generally you need a setup. I know that we didn't ice up R&D, and this is where I think like Chiriboga plays a bit different than most other opponents. I would here want to be getting breakers down in economy. This is much easier when you're Zahya, but they just touched a bunch of cards. This eyeball is really cool. It means that we know that they know that card, and we're going to mandatory draw that in a second. So we have a tithe. Now, this is what they expect us to put on R&D. I do not know if Chiriboga AI plays around the expected ice, but here we're probably just going to empty the Regolith a bit, and we have to make sure R&D is a bit secure, because again, all the agendas in here besides 1, the 1 pointer we're playing will win the game for our opponent. Now, the unfortunate thing is the Tithe is a bad ice to end up on your remote server when an agenda is scored or stolen and DAO puts it there. That is just what DAO does. When an agenda is scored or stolen, you can swap 2 ice around. So the Tithe is a bit of a liability, but we'll go ahead and get that R&D because it's better than nothing. This, at least now, anytime they run through it, we'll get our money and they'll take net damage, which can hurt, but not a great start to lose 5 points on turn 2, but we can still win from this point. So our game plan is to empty the Regolith a bit more and then push Anoetic into Send a Message. They're starting click 1 with Viarcation. You don't often see that. This card you want to spend later in the turn because it takes 2 clicks unless you play a last click, and they're just setting up Pantograph, getting some money, getting some card draw. So they're on 12 credits, but not showing any breakers so far, so we're feeling okay. Top deck Off-World Office, we could have lost if they just ran R&D, and again, I don't know if Chiriboga is as aggressive as I recommend you to be, because this ice, forcing us to spend money and getting information is super valuable for DAO. So if they ran R&D there, they could have won the game. So now it's up to us to decide whether we want to just push this Off-World Office behind Brawn into Palisade. We can lose the game if they have exactly a barrier breaker, and they know they can click through Brawn, so breaking this is actually pretty expensive. So if they run first click, we can just res the Palisade to keep them out, and that might do it. So it's up to us to figure out what to do here. We probably want to get the Anoetic Void in the remote server so that we can choose to use it, but notice we don't have a lot of cards in hand, so using Anoetic Void is going to be quite difficult. So I think here we just want to take maybe 6 credits off of this and then draw a card, which means if we're drawing cards, we should do it sooner in the turn. We're here looking for a seamless launch, and that we have. So next turn, we can push the Off-World Office and not show it's an Off-World Office. We also want to keep enough cards in hand because if the runner ever runs HQ, there's a big chance they win the game. So we can keep up to 6 cards in hand. But I think here we're just going to take some money, and then next turn we'll try and push our first agenda. Cool. Back to our opponent. No idea what they're going to do. I can't tell what the Chiriboga AI does. So here they definitely need to be drawing into their deck to find breakers. I'm assuming the Chiriboga random AI will put enough breakers into their deck that they have options. Now they're playing Wildcat Strike, and we have a decision. Do we want to give them 4 cards or 6 credits? Now 6 credits is a lot of money. They've already paid 2 for it, so it's only gaining 4 credits, but card draw is pretty low in System Gateway, and card draw is how they find their breakers, and breakers is how they win the game. So I'm just going to say you can have money, you can't have card draw. I think 9 out of 10 times in System Gateway when Wildcat Strike is played, you almost always give money because look at this. Well, they found their Fractor. That's actually kind of frightening because they can get into this remote server, but they're still looking for the decoder and they're still looking maybe for their killer. This is frightening. Now, this remote server is expensive. If you want to break Brawn, unless you click through it, it is a lot of money and it's a lot of time. Otherwise, you break the Palisade for 4 credits, so the money will go. Now, on this turn, I think we want to push the Anoetic Void, we want to push the Off-World Office, and then we can seamless launch advance it, which means we have a click left. We can either use that click to gain 3 credits, which we don't actually need that much money. This ice is all res for less than like 6 credits, or we can get another card in hand. And getting another card in hand is pretty valuable because we need cards in hand to fire Anoetic Void. So I'm going to leave these 3 credits. I'm going to draw a card here. We drew into another seamless. That's nice. And then I'm going to install over the Regolith mining license. So when we install this, you can only again have 1 agenda or 1 asset in any server. We're going to install an upgrade on top of it. Again, it'll ask you if you want to trash cards. This is similarly to when you install ice. When you install anything in a remote server, you can trash anything else in the remote server. So we will ask you about this. You can put it to auto skip if you want to. There's not a big reason in System Gateway to over install upgrades. So regardless, I like the option. So now next turn, we're going to try and score this out. We'll see how aggressive our opponent is. Again, things like overclock that can get into the remote server. The question is how often can they run it? Because Anoetic Void, we can fire that at least twice this turn. So they have to run this remote server up to 3 times. And they're running it first click. I really like this. This is good aggression. So we're going to res the Palisade. It is 4 strength on the remote server. This eventually will end up on centrals and they'll break it for 1 credit. So they're going to pay 4 for this. And so now they break it. You get the cool visual effect of the lines. You see any subroutine they break gets crossed off. It usually aligns pretty well. Now, next up, we're going to see what they do for the Brawn. 6 strength, 3 subroutines. It looks like they're just clicking through them. It's a lot cheaper than breaking. So they have no clicks left. And that's fantastic for us because now we can just res Anoetic Void and end the run relatively cheaply. So they're in here. So here it offers us to res the Anoetic Void. Otherwise, we can continue to success. Any relevant paid ability trigger, largely, Chiriboga will be very obvious. So this is the last time that we can res Anoetic Void. And now here we can spend 2 credits and 2 clicks to end the run, which we definitely will. So we'll pay 2 and trash 2 from HQ. So what cards we're going to trash? We don't want to throw out the agenda. The Nego campaign we can definitely throw out, so we just have to drag that to the bin. Now, I actually do like these 2 seamless launches because 2 seamless launches means we can never advance a send a message on the following turn. We just install it, and then we do seamless launch, advance. It's a very powerful card. The Anoetic Void is unique, and that being said, it's one of the best cards in our deck, but we will throw that out for now. And now with no clicks left, our opponent spend their whole turn, and we just spend 2 cards and 2 credits. It's not incredibly sustainable. We can't do that every single turn, But at least now they have full information on what's in this remote server, and it's back to us to score. If they got in there, we would have lost the game. Now, mandatory draw, we drew a white space. They can't break this just yet. They can beat this by just having enough money. So we'll go ahead and score this agenda out. What I find really weird about Chiriboga is that when you play Seamless Launch, it says place 2 advancements on a card that you did not install this turn. Technically, we can put advancements on any card on the table, and that can matter. If we play advanceable ice, you can advance your ice, right? But when you play this, it just says, I know there's an agenda, and it puts advancements on the agenda. I think that's such a funny shortcut that catches me off guard, because obviously we're going to be seamless launching this, but in theory, you can seamless launch any card. Chiriboga does that. It takes some shortcuts to make the game easier to play. So we're going to score Off-World Office. We're going to gain 7 credits. That's fantastic. And also now we can add a card from archives back to our hand, because that's what Precision Design does. And so normally here, I would either take the seamless launch. Another option is we can take the Managarm Skunkworks. And while we have 2 more of these in our deck, this is a really strong defensive upgrade that makes it even harder to run the remote server. This turn, they actually could challenge the Anoetic and take it down, which would be a bummer for us if they want to break this for 4, click through this, because we can't really protect the Anoetic another time. So the Managarm actually might be reasonable, and then we could just use a single seamless launch. I'm going to go for the Managarm. I actually think the Managarm is pretty swell here, because we just need another defensive upgrade, because they're going to get the breakers down eventually, and if they have enough money. This is also the bad thing that happens, Dow fires. So firstly, they can swap 2 ice, so our Brawn is now on R&D, and we have Tithe into Palisade. This is one of the problems sometimes by installing bad ice like Tithe, is that it ends up on the remote server. Like, this is a really good ice for central servers. I shouldn't call it a bad ice. It's one of my favorite ice, but it's not great on the remote server because they can always run through this. They also got Pantograph, which gives them the credit, allows them to install a card. I don't think they chose to install a card, but they did at least get a credit when an agenda was scored or stolen. So it looks like they're setting up a telework. They're discarding a mutual favor. Again, I don't know how the Chiriboga AI works. Usually when your opponent discards a mutual favor or a breaker, it means that they have another copy of that breaker and they don't need this. I don't know if Chiriboga does that. So you have to keep that in mind, that sometimes Chiriboga is a bit harder to read. Now here on this remote server, we have Palisade into an unknown ice. We have an Anoetic Void as long as we have cards and credit. And here we can actually push the Managarm, which makes it harder to deal with because you have to pay for the Managarm and then pay for the Anoetic, which for our opponent is going to be pretty expensive. Then we can also put the send a message in the remote server and advance it once. If we do that, next turn we can score out the send a message and also be on game point. This is maybe a bit aggressive. Another option is we get the white space on the remote server, and the white space doesn't exactly end the run if our opponent has money, but we're going to try and push it here. And again, it's hard to tell how aggressive Chiriboga is going to be, but we'll put that in the remote server. It's going to ask us if we want to overinstall any things. We're not going to. We'll put the send a message in there. It might ask us if we want to overinstall. We're not going to. And then we're going to advance this once, so next turn we can score this out. Now, in theory, that means we can only fire Anoetic Void once. The server might not be bulletproof, but I don't know how aggressive our opponent's going to be. In theory, they might guess that this is a code gate. If you're this, like, sometimes you just have to bluff, and I don't know whether you can bluff Chiriboga. Regardless, you might just want to check this. So they're going to start. They're going to run here with 2 clicks left. That's kind of perfect because it means they can double click to the Managarm. They break the Palisade for 4. Pretty good for an ice we res for 3. Again, they can move this on central servers and it gets a fair bit worse. And then they'll continue and we'll definitely res the Tithe. It shows that there's a Tithe here, which is not amazing, but at least it's free to res because the subroutine will fire and we'll take a card out of our opponent's hand. So we'll click on it to res it. Anything glowing you can largely click on. The Tithe will fire here because they have no killer, so it'll do a net damage. We hit a Docklands Pass, not bad, and we'll gain credit back. Now, once they pass this ice, they know that we can end the run with the Anoetic Void. It's still expensive. It's cards out of our hand. But also here now we can res the Managarm Skunkworks. And both of these have the same trigger. They trigger when the runner passes a ice and they're about to approach the server. And so we can choose which one that we want the runner to interact with first. We're definitely going to make them pay for the Managarm first. So now they have to pay 2 clicks or 5 credits. And after they've done that, we can still Anoetic Void here. There's a chance they can get into this remote server. Actually, no, probably not. They would need an overclock. But here now we have to end the run or we lose the game. And so we're going to pay 2 cards and 2 credits from our hand. And we're going to keep the seamless launch because we need that to score the agenda. So we just drag these to the bin. We'll drag this one back to the bin, and this should end the run. Now, our opponent, if they want to get back, they have to break this for 4, and then they can let this fire, and we can't fire him Anoetic again, so they need to get into the server with credits, which means I think an overclock sometimes can get them in here. But they're just going to end their turn by playing a creative commission, so we're luckily going to get our send a message and res a white space for free, which is not fantastic, but hey, at least we're also on game point. It's back to us. They're on 12 credits. We drew a Managarm, which is not too bad, so we're going to do seamless launch, top of the send message, automatically does it for you, doesn't even ask. And then we're going to do advance, and we're going to score. When we score this, we can res an ice for free. Sometimes it's not worth doing, but now we have 2 triggers. We have Precision Design, which can add a card to hand, and we have the send a message trigger. In theory, you can choose the order of this. It won't often matter, but we're going to use the send a message first to just get a free white space. Honestly, here, saving 2 credits to keep this as a secret from your opponent is probably more worth it because now they have full information how to DAO around, but I don't know how the AI uses that information. And now we need to add a card back to our hand. Our hand size is low, which means Anoetic Void is going to be impossible to protect. So if we had anything that draws cards, I'd probably add it back. I think instead we're going to add a Seamless Launch, which is just an important card because it means if we draw 4-2 agenda, we can just put it in the remote server and we don't have to pre-advance it, telling our opponent it's an agenda. We'll see if Dow fires and we'll see if they fire the Pantograph to install a card or at least gain a credit, but they can always switch our ice around. So they can make R&D, like they can put a Tithe on it, just run through the R&D all they want, just take a bit of net damage. They decided not to move our ice around, which is probably correct, honestly. Like this server is not fantastic. If anything, they could take the Palisade off the remote server, but currently that's the only ice they have a breaker for. So Verbal comes down, they get some telework credits, they pass backed up. They're on 13 credits, only showing 1 breaker. I don't think they ended up using the Pantograph that turn. If we draw an agenda, we can put it in the remote server and have a chance. That's fantastic. This is a planogram. This draws 3 cards. We just need cards in hand to fire the Anoetic Void as much as we can. So we're going to draw 3 with this. Let's draw 3 or gain 3. They're not tagged. We didn't find an agenda, but we found money, which is okay. And we found another piece of ice for the remote server. This is on sell. It's a pretty annoying piece of ice. It's hard for them to deal with. They haven't found a killer yet. And if they click through this, that means Anoetic Void will be pretty powerful. Now, unfortunately here, we know the whole game is still in R&D, right? We know that there's still 4 agendas and all of them are here in the 21 cards. So again, 1 in 5 for them to find an agenda off the top of the deck. That's not great for us, right? Like we don't love that. So we could decide to draw once more here and put it into the remote server, but they actually might be able to contest the remote server if we find an agenda. So our question is, do we put it on sell in R&D to hold R&D off? Or do we put it on the remote server to make the remote server more protected? I honestly don't know here. I think we could put it on the remote server and just hope that on sell into Palisade is a pretty good remote server. And we're going to need our remote server to be good to have a chance of winning the game. I think we will do that. I'm going to play the hedge fund here. We need to keep cards in hand, mind you, for Anoetic Void, but this is going to be an expensive install. It's functionally 8 credits because we need to install it for 2 and then res for 6. And we could trash the Tithe, but I actually kind of like the Tithe. They don't have a killer yet and it's annoying. If you want Dow to be less annoying, you can trash this Tithe here to save a credit. And that might be fine. If they score not a winning agenda somehow, they can move the Tithe to R&D and that's a liability. I think here we can afford to spend an extra credit and keep the Tithe around. It's back to our opponent. Again, we just need to draw an agenda, get cards in hand, put in the remote server, and it might be difficult to deal with the server. We'll see what our opponent does here. They have 13 credits, but only 1 breaker so far. They got some good card draw with the Verbal Plasticity, which came down a couple turns ago. So they'll be drawing once a turn, and there you go. They got 2 cards from that draw. So Overclock is a problem. They have a Unity that breaks the white space on HQ. We're happy if they run HQ here, and they're putting down a Telework, which is a slow enough econ card, as much as it is pretty good econ for them. So they're still missing a way to break sentries, but they threw out the mutual favor, right? Like it doesn't always make sense. Back to us, Mandatory Drew. We drew up another planogram. This is why we love this card, because it gives us card draw. Now, if we draw 2 agendas, it might be a problem, but if we draw an agenda, it goes straight into the remote server. So we'll draw 3. We just need cards in hand for Anoetic. We drew an agenda. That's exactly what we want. We also have another Brawn. That might be a bit expensive. So we're going to put this in the remote server. Now, we don't need to pre-advance it. We're not going to trash anything because we have Seamless Launches and we can fire Anoetic Void twice. We can throw out 4 of our cards here. So all we need to make sure is we can res the on sell. We can fire Anoetic Void twice, which means all we need here is money. So I'll just click for a credit. Again, maybe it mattered that we overinstalled the Tithe, but this is game point here on the remote server. If the runner can't pressure this, we do Seamless Launch into Seamless Launch or just Seamless Launch Advance. So it depends how many times they can make us fire Anoetic Void or how much money we have. So they're starting to draw. That's a good start for us because it's hard to deal with the server. You're playing Creative Commission for click 2 and 3. Generally don't want to do that because it costs an extra click and they're just dropping a conduit and giving the turn to us. They just put on no pressure this turn. They just set up. And for us, now we can just score out in the remote server. Again, this is a Chiriboga thing. I don't know if the AI opponent reads board state and understands, oh, I could lose here. Whether or not they could have contested this remote server is another question. And their deck is random at the end of the day. But we're going to be able to pull it off 7-5, scoring this and winning the game. Nice. Easy. And this shows us what the deck does. And mind you, Dow makes it a bit tricky because our ice gets moved around and ice placement is very important. The fact that the Brawn ended up on R&D was actually okay for the mid game where the Brawn and R&D kept R&D safe. But that shows you how easy Chiriboga is to play, either on the fast mode or the slow mode. On that note, let's get another game in here. We can play against the Anarch and Criminal and we'll talk through all our lines. So we'll just hit play again and re-import the deck. I didn't know that if you hit the play again button in the bottom left, it just randomizes your opponent's deck and identity. So we're playing against Zahya. This is, again, not the Zahya deck we built as much as we can give that deck to our opponent. This is just a random Zahya deck. So back to us, we can decide whether or not we want to mulligan. And our opening hand has slight economy. It has a sprint. It does have on sell, which again is not my favorite ice in the early game because the runner doesn't have installed cards usually. So half these subroutines don't matter, especially if there's no cards in archives. Makes this a lot worse. But we do have an off-world office and an Anoetic Void. I'm going to mulligan this. I think the most important thing we can do in the early game is ice up our central servers to some extent, because Zahya gets a lot of click compression just touching central servers. So if a leech comes down, a penny shaver, a red team, we just want to make sure that the central servers are harder to run. So we're going to mulligan his hand and hopefully get a white space, a palisade, tithes, just cheap stuff for central servers. All right, that's similar. Not that much better, but that's okay. At least we have a sprint here to fix the hand. Now our runner kept, you can tell that in the top right corner, we mandatory drew into a palisade. So we have some cheap ice for central servers. Now, Palisade. This is a card I want on the remote server because it ends the run, and you need an end the run in the early game to score out your agendas. Ideally, we score out an early Luminal, or actually an early Offworld Office is also pretty nice because we need the money. But here we're just going to try and get annoying ice on central servers. I think it's going to be a bit awkward here. The Tithe, it's actually really frustrating for Zahya to get through this, because if she wants to break all of it with her breaker eventually, that's like 2 credits, which really countersets the fact that Zahya is getting paid running central servers. So one of the options here is we can start with a sprint. Ideally, we're looking for a hedge fund, but this means we can get one of the agendas out of our hand if we want to, and maybe get a better hand in general. So we'll start with a sprint here. Nice. That's really, really good for the early game. White space are just like the cheapest things you can res that'll keep our opponent out. And now we're going to shuffle back the on sell because it's way too expensive right now. So we just shuffle that back into the deck by dragging it. That's pretty cute. And then the question is whether we keep the Offworld Office or the Luminal. Luminal is a lot easier to score early because you can never advance it and just do advance, 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 get another turn. But Offworld Office is actually probably more important because we have no money in this hand. And so we're going to need to score this out to get money. This might be wild, but I actually think we're going to keep the Offworld Office here because our hand has no economy and we need some amount of economy, particularly because we're going to be rezzing some ice really quickly. So I'm going to put the white space on HQ and I'm going to put the Tithe on R&D. Tithe is just a super cheap res. You generally res it for free on face check, and this will just make these servers hard to run. Our remote server, if we're in the best case, we can put Palisade and white space, so one early breaker won't beat it. But again, let's see how aggressive Zahya is. I'm not sure Chiriboga is going to be as aggro as we recommend Zahya to be. Click 1, drawing, clicking for a credit, installing a T400 memory diamond, and drawing. Now that turn, with all due respect to Chiriboga, which I think is fantastic, is a bit of a salad. That was a strange turn. This memory diamond came down for 2 credits on a turn where the MU doesn't matter, the hand size doesn't really matter. They technically did install and then draw. You always want to do the opposite. You want to be drawing first, installing later. We talked about this in the last replay video, and they didn't pressure. They didn't force us to res any of our ice, which you generally should. There's probably an agenda in hand. You can check the top of R&D because Zahya gets paid. These are all things that hopefully we hammered home pretty hard in the last video talking about Zahya fundamentals. You always run. You force the corporation to spend their money, because if we spend money resing this stuff and we drew a hedge fund or we drew a Nico or a Regolith we want to put in the remote server, we wouldn't be able to protect it. So again, Chiriboga is a fantastic tool. Just watch out. If you're learning how to beat Chiriboga and you can consistently beat Chiriboga, Chiriboga does not play like a Netrunner player who's played a dozen games. At the end of the series, you'll be playing better than Chiriboga. I promise you. Maybe that's a good place to practice against it then. So here, we're only on 5 credits. That can go pretty quickly. This is ice that costs us money to res. Now, if we want to push the Offworld Office, we have to do Palisade, install Offworld Office, advance, which puts us down to 4 credits, which means they can just run the remote server and then we're nearly bankrupt. But also on top of that, if they have something like a Tread Lightly, we can't even res the ice. So we need to find some economy here. So I'm going to click 1 draw to get some more options. It's an expensive ice. That's not very good. So I think we're just going to do this slowly, set up our remote server for next turn and click for a credit. Next turn, hopefully we get an economy card. I'd love a hedge fund, a Regolith, or a Nico. And if not, maybe we'll push the Offworld Office and just hope that they don't have a Tread Lightly in hand. Sometimes you have to take risks. Our opponent, they have 5 MU. That's going to definitely help. We'll see how they start. So clicking to draw at the beginning, that's great. 7 cards in hand. They do have that precision design hand size. Sure gamble, nice. That's what they need to be doing again. And after they install the T400, it's like hard to sure gamble too because you're below 5. And they're just going to end their turn with 10 credits, not even running at all, which you need to be aggressive. Back to us, Spin Doctor. Okay, Spin Doctor gives us options. It's very likely we'll draw into economy card. We have a lot of economy cards in this deck. We have Regolith, we have Nico, we have Hedge Fund, we have even Predictive Planogram. So we're going to start by just giving ourselves options at the beginning of the turn before we commit to anything. We'll install Spin Doctor. We'll draw with Spin Doctor. We draw 2 cards. They'll both be hedge funds. That's fine. Kind of hedge fund. So we can just use this to gain 3 credits. So we're just going to gain 3 credits. And then we're probably going to continue to set up. So we're going to gain 3 here. Now next turn, we can install Offworld Office, play Predictive Planogram, advance the Offworld Office. If we draw something like a Seamless Launch, that's fine for us because then we can score the Offworld Office faster, or if you draw Manic Arm Skunk Works. Now this is a Palisade that ends the run. One thing I'm going to do in the early game, if you want to push out in the remote server, if you want to make your remote server 2 different types of ice, that helps you a heck of a lot. Because if the runner just drops their Fractor, they can break the Palisade. But if the runner drops their Decoder, they can break the white space. So now we have some options. So in the next turn, if we want to push the agenda, we can decide to res whatever ice we think is better for the board state. So a lot of times you don't want to do Palisade into Palisade. You want to do Palisade into Code Gate if you can do it. Luckily here we have options. Eventually we want to get a Brawn on the remote server. I just can't really afford to res it now, but with send a messages that the runner can steal from R&D, we want to make sure we have an expensive ice on the table we can res for free. All right, opponent's drawing up. There you go. The cleaver's coming down. So we might see some more pressure. Again, Zahya hasn't run. It's been a couple turns already, making me uncomfortable. But here now, that's why we install the white space. Back to us. We drew another Spin Doctor. Okay, I think we're just going to push our first agenda here. So we'll do Off-World Office. We'll advance it once. And we're going to need maybe a bit more money here. So I'm just going to play the Planogram for 3 credits. Planograms are really good for card draw as well, but we have another Spin Doctor in hand. So we're just going to gain 3 credits here, put us on a comfortable 10. On 10, that means that if we do get Tread Lightly, we can still res a white space. This might not necessarily end the run because if the runner has at least 10 credits when these subroutines fire, they can get through it. But if they can get through this and lose money, it might be harder for them to break the Palisade for 4 credits. And they're running. This is fantastic. They are face checking. Unfortunately, they're on 9 credits, which for us means we can res the white space and the subroutines will fire. They will lose 3 credits, which puts them at 6, which means this ends the run. If the runner actually just clicked for a credit, they could have beaten this remote server. That's a really heads up play in some ways, but also a lot of times the runner wants to run first click. So if they find like a Brawn or an on-sell, they can click through it. So we got a bit lucky here that they were on few credits. They're continuing to draw up. Again, still no pressure on central server. Zahya's ability just hasn't mattered. They put down a Mayfly. This is not a card we put in our deck, but it means that they can break any kinds of ice. That's pretty frightening as much as this card is pretty expensive, but that's last click. Again, a lot of times we recommend don't install your breakers last click because now we know that the opponent can break any ice this next turn and we won't take any risks potentially. Now, it doesn't matter too much because we're going to be scoring on an agenda this turn. Just advance it 3 times and then get our best card back from archives into our hand. So we're going to score this, gain 7. That's sick. We can add Sprint or we can add a Planogram. I think I actually like the Planogram. It's just a bit more money. It's a weird card to add back into your hand, but we haven't found a Seamless Launch or a Hedge Fund or a defensive upgrade. So we'll just take the Planogram. We have 6 hand size, so we're all set here and we'll see how aggressively they use this Mayfly. All right, back to the runner. We've ended our turn. They technically can break any ice as much as they don't have that much money, but we'll see if they put that aggression somewhere. We probably have an agenda in hand at this point. Again, we've drawn through 15 cards, so you're expecting about 3 agendas as much as we did sprint back 1 or 2 cards. Starting with a sure gamble there, drawing up, and just kind of slow, just clicking for credits again, not being aggressive. It's going to be difficult to push in a remote server because they have Mayfly, and Mayfly beats any ice. So we're going to need a defensive upgrade largely to be able to push in a remote server if we want to do that with safety. Ooh, Karuna, nice. This is a Sentry. Generally put this on central servers because it is taxing, and the face check on it's not bad. So here we can push out the off-world office if we wanted to. Now, I want a defensive upgrade. Our deck has 3 Managarms. Our deck also has 2 Anoetic Voids. We also have Nikos and Regalists in the deck that look like agendas but aren't agendas. So what I want to do here is actually force the runner to use their Mayfly running the remote server. I want to bait it out. And one of the best ways we can bait that out is by finding something that looks like an agenda that's not an agenda. So here, I'm going to use Spin Doctor to draw more cards to find a Regolith or find a Nico or find a defensive upgrade and then push in the remote server, whatever makes sense. A defended upgrade on top of an agenda might work out, or Nico or Regolith to bait the runner. Now, Spin Doctor, very importantly, is unique. So if we wanted to res our second Spin Doctor, we'd have to trash this Spin Doctor or use its ability to remove it from the game to shuffle 2 cards back. Now, I think a lot of players here might just remove this asset from the game to shuffle 2 cards from archives into R&D, but I'll be honest, these 2 cards back into our deck, I don't think are incredibly important. So what I'm going to do instead is install the Spin Doctor into a new remote server. And when I res it, it'll just trash this Spin Doctor. And why I want to do that is because now this Spin Doctor here is a card that we can shuffle back in with this Spin Doctor here. Sometimes the best card to Spin Doctor back into your deck is another Spin Doctor. So I don't think I want to immediately always snap, remove from game any Spin Doctor when it's going to be trashed. Sometimes you want to let the runner trash it, and sometimes you want it to be in the bin so you can bring it back with precision design or with another Spin Doctor. And we drew into a Managarm. This means if we put into the remote server, Managarm and an agenda, they can still probably get in there. They have to break the white space for 1 to 2 credits, and then they break this for 4, and then they can either pay 2 clicks or 5 for that. It makes them spend money. I just wish we had a card to put in the remote server that looked like an agenda, and it isn't, but we don't. We also want to get an expensive piece of ice on the table sooner than later on the basis that there's still 3 send a message in R&D. And at this point, they might run R&D with like a jailbreak or a conduit, and we want to be able to res something. So I think we're going to need to get our Brawn on here to make this remote server really good. And we need to get something annoying on R&D. I think I'm going to do the Karuna on R&D. And then last click, I think we're just going to get 3 credits. I'm not going to trash cards here. I'm just going to go ahead and get 3 credits because we haven't resed any of this ice and it's going to cost us money. So we want to make sure we have enough money. Next turn, again, we either push an agenda and another piece of ice, or we just push a Regolith or a Nico that hopefully we draw into soon enough. Let's see what our opponent does. They're going to start by drawing. Again, not happy with their hand. They click for credit from 12 to 13. It looks like they're going to install the buzzsaw, so their breakers are showing up. They can technically break everything still with the Mayfly, but sentries are going to be the hard thing. We'll see if Zahya is going to fire her text. And no, just click for another credit. Yeah, I don't know. It should be way more aggressive than this. It's not. We finally have a regolith. This is exactly what we want. Let's see if they challenge the remote server. So we're going to put the Managarm. We're going to put the regolith. This means if they want to find out what this regolith is, which we won't res, they have to pay the Managarm tax. And here, I think we can afford to get an annoying piece of ice on the remote server. Either Brawn, because it's Brawn, or we can go ahead and do the on-sell, which they might click through because these subroutines are really quite bad. If they pay through this with Mayfly, it costs them like 6 credits, which is sick. So we're just going to install that. We're only on 12 credits, so we're not 100% sure if they're going to aggress on R&D, on HQ, or the remote server, but we're feeling okay. Right now, the weakest server is HQ, because if they run HQ, they break this for 1, and then they get a credit back every time they run, so it's technically free. Let's see again if they charge. They are. Click 1 charging the remote server. I really like this from our opponents. So now we have to decide what we res. If we res the on-sell, they'll probably click through it. If we res the Palisade, that leaves us with 3 credits, and so we can still res the regolith. I think this might cost us a lot of money, but we need to get the stuff resed anyways, so we'll see how they interact with this. They can't break it unless they use the Mayfly, and the subroutines on this are really quite good. So it looks like they're going to click through the subroutines. They might let us have a card from HQ Archives. It looks like they're going to let us have a card from HQ Archives. That's surprising. Well, we can bring a Spin Doctor back. There's some good value in that. We also can install some ice somewhere, which I don't know if we want to do that. If it's last click, very importantly, if you have an agenda in hand, you can install the agenda on the table and they can't run it because they have no clicks left. But on this turn, they can. So I'm just going to go ahead and put the Spin Doctor back on the table. And if we res it, we res it. It's another good reason to have a Spin Doctor in your bin. Now, they have 10 credits, which means white space, they break it for 1 credit no matter what. This eyeball is really cool because the runner understands they know what that card is. I think that's great that Chiriboga tracks that. White space, they can either break it with Mayfly or Buzzsaw. I'm assuming they'll use their Buzzsaw because the Mayfly is a bit more flexible and the Buzzsaw is a bit cheaper generally. So they break that for 1. They're going to continue. We only have 6 credits. So if we want to res the Palisade into the Managarm, it's going to be most of our money. We can continue not resing here, but I think this is going to be important because it costs them 4 credits and we also need to make them spend their money. They've already played a couple economy cards. They played 2 sure gambles so far. So we'll see what other money they have in their deck. We're going to break Palisade for 4. They're down to 6 credits, and 6 credits is perfect because if we res the Managarm, they only have 1 click and they only have 6 credits. So if they want to see what this card is and they think it's an agenda and they pay the 5 credits here, they're only going to have 1 credit, which means not only can they not trash the Managarm, they can't trash the regolith. So we'll see what they decide. If they're going to pay 5 of their 6 credits or they're going to end the run. Oh, they chose to end the run. They spent all that money and they were not baited in deeper with our regolith, which is fascinating. I don't know how the AI makes the decision, whether they realize like, I can't trash the Managarm, it's not worth it. But now next turn, we can click our regolith after we click for credit and we'll financially get back into it. So we make them spend a lot of time and money. And at the end of the day, we're okay with that. So we're going to click for credit by hitting this button. We'll res the regolith and we'll just take 6 off of this. Next turn, we might put another piece of ice on here and jam an agenda, or we'll just keep working on the regolith because, again, we have a lot of ice we have to res. We have to make sure we don't go too low on credits because if we go to no money, and then they can just run R&D and then Zahya can finally fire, which hasn't fired. I'm not upset. All right, 7 credits. Our opponent needs to make money. We'll see if they start face checking again. There's no sentries they have to really worry about as long as they run first click because of this. They can click through on cells, let alone if it's just net damage is net damage. Oh, Fermenter, nice. This program gives them money over time, a very strong card. You have to remember you can purge this. And they're running not last click, but nearly last click. This means the Karuna, if they don't want these subroutines to fire, they have to use their Mayfly, which I think this is a nice res. If they use a Mayfly on this, I'm okay with it. Karuna has 2 net damage, and if they want to keep going 2 more net damage, it looks like they're going to take 2 net damage. They lose a Tranquilizer and a Varcation. You can double check, I think, in the log here. Yeah, Tranquilizer and Varcation. So those are some nice hits. Tranquilizer is a pretty annoying card. And they're going to continue, which means they took 4 net damage. Wait, they continued? Oh, they continued through it. So they also lost a Mutual Favor and they lost an Overclock. They lost a lot of cards on that. And they're going to continue, which means they're going to take another net damage here. That being said, there's still agendas in this deck. Like this sort of aggression sometimes is correct. Now, they can decide to break this with Mayfly. I'd be very surprised if they do. So they're going to lose another Varcation from him. That's some influence. We're going to get a credit back, and now they're going to touch a card of the deck. Unfortunately, there's a lot of agendas still in our deck. It's 6 and 25, so the density is higher than 1 and 5. So this is not unlikely for them to get an agenda. We could have drawn with Spin Doctor there if we wanted to. Not a huge reason. And also they'll get their first Zahya credit all game, which good for them. No, they found a 1-pointer. That's fine. We usually don't want this one. So they found an agenda. They feel happy, but also we don't draw a superconducting hub. Sick. Last click. They're just drawing up, so they're on 2 cards in hand. We got out some pretty important cards, like they lost the Mutual Favor, they lost the Tranquilizer, they lost the Overclock, and they lost a lot of card draw. So again, that was still fine for them. It forced us to spend most of our money and slowed the game down. So here, we can push the off-world office. Probably we have a window here. I think we still are not comfortable with the money we have. So I'm going to take some money off of the Regolith. And I think we probably want another piece of ice on HQ. Again, if this was a human opponent, they probably would have run HQ by now. I think we need to get something on HQ just to be slightly annoying. Now, white space, they break for 1 credit, which isn't stellar. So we could commit a pretty big annoying one here. Ideally, we don't res this. We just get it resed for free from a send a message that shows up. We always want to have 1 expensive ice on the table that we haven't resed yet. So send a message does something for us. All right, 7 credits. And mind you, they can always click the fermenter to gain 4. This means they spend 2 clicks on 3 credits, which doesn't sound fantastic. They draw their penny shaver up. They should be aggressive, and they just continue to draw again. Now, they installed and then drew. You want to do that in the opposite direction, of course, because imagine they drew a sure gamble. They can't play it. Oh, we got a Luminal. That's really, really good. Now, unfortunately here, we have 2-pointer into 2-pointer into 2-pointer, which gets us to 6, which means we actually want the 1-pointer to win the game. So ideally, we score one of these and then score a 5-3 to close the game. The question is whether we want another turn or whether we want 7 credits. And honestly, it's kind of close here. Now, I think we're going to start with the Regolith. They're only on 4 credits, so it's hard for them to deal with this remote server. If they crack the fermenter for 6, this costs about 5 credits, and this costs them, well, money or their turn, which is pretty good for us. We could put another piece of ice on here if we want to be really safe. I think that might be a bit too much. So we're going to take the Regolith credits, and then either we do install Advance the Offworld or just install Luminal. I think we might just install the Luminal so we don't have to show it's an agenda. And then we can choose to put another piece of ice in front of here. It'll cost us 3 credits if we want to keep all this ice. I think at this point we can decide to discard the white space. They're breaking it for 1 credit. It's not fantastic anymore. And it will save us 1 credit. So we could put another Brawn in front of there and make the server like really, really, really secure. Now, just to show you how this works, if you want to install or trash your ice, you just do that. And now this will only cost us 2 credits, which means next turn we can score the Luminal and add our favorite card from our heap back to our hand. It could be that white space. It's probably going to be the Regolith. Now, our opponent, they have 6 credits waiting in the fermenter, so their money's not that bad. We always can take a turn off and purge. In fact, we can score out the Luminal and then purge. It's always a fun turn. They install their verbal going down to 1 credit, so they really need this fermenter money, so we're really incentivized to purge. Looks like they're just going to use it. Okay, so we don't have to consider that. They're on 7 credits. They have 3 breakers. Their board state is setting up a bit. Back to us, we draw a hedge fund. Sick. So we actually can score this out and still hedge fund on the next turn. I think that's fine. At this point, they're only on 1.2. So what's important to understand with Netrunner is that after we score this, we can push our off-world office. Now, the runner might be able to get the off-world office. If they have something like an overclock, they can get into this remote server. It's very likely that they can get into the remote server. I'm going to do this trigger first. It doesn't really matter the order, and then I'll grab a card from archives. That being said, if they spend their time, their money, their overclock to get through this remote server, that's fine because they don't win the game, and making them spend time and money means the next agenda we'll push, they won't be prepared for that. So again, it's very important now to remember, you don't need a bulletproof board state. You just need a good enough board state, and you can generally force these scoring windows. Now, it's different in our last game where our opponent was on 5 points on like turn 2. Like, that's hard because if they steal any agenda, they usually win the game. But here, when they're at 1 point, put an agenda in the remote server. If they spend their whole turn and 12 credits and trash or upgrade, like maybe next turn we just put an agenda in there and we can win. Now, what's the card we want to add back? Sprint is not bad because it's card draw. Predictive is card draw and money. And then Regolith is just money. And our money's not fantastic. We'll definitely play hedge fund and maybe we'll score the off-world. So maybe our money is fine. If that's the case, I'll add predictive, which is a mixture of card draw or economy, whatever we need for the board state. A very flexible card. We haven't seen a seamless launch yet, which is a bit of a bummer, but it is what it is. So we'll do hedge fund, and then we need to install the off-world and advance it to be able to score it next turn because we don't have a seamless launch. We're not going to overinstall. Again, you can hit auto skip. I like to have that option. We'll advance and end our turn. If we're forced to res the Brawn for 6, it probably will keep them out. It'll keep us bankrupt though, which is pretty bad. So it's nice that we have the planogram to recover. But if they do tread lightly this, we can't res the Brawn because it'll cost 9. It is what it is. Again, if they tread lightly the remote server and break the on-sell and pay for the Palisade and pay for the Mana Garm, we're not too upset. They start by drawing up 2. They're on 2 credits. Then install the red team. Now this card, they're running R&D here. Now archives is a click for 4 credits with red team and Penny Shaver, but they're running to the Karuna. I'm assuming they're just letting this fire. This is my favorite thing when it comes to this ice. It doesn't end the run. So you can throw out 5 cards to get through this to make a successful run and make like 5 credits, which is a lot. So we'll see what they do here. It looks like they're just going to hit that. They're going to lose a ton of cards there. They lost Carmen, Mayfly, Tread Lightly, Overclock. So that's a lot of money that went out of their hand. It's a tithe. They're actually going to break the net damage subroutine on tithe, the Mayfly. So they're trading their Mayfly for 1 card from hand, which again, I don't think that makes a lot of sense. They're giving us credit on tithe, which we appreciate. And now they're going to access 1 card. The worst thing about the Mayfly is when they use this, if you've used it during a turn, you have to trash it. So they traded the Mayfly again, which is a very valuable card when they lost their Carmen as well, potentially. Oh, wow. Okay, never mind. They found to send a message like that. Okay, they feel good about that. That's for sure. But I guess we get a free Brawn. Fair trade. Sometimes it just happens. Again, I want to be very clear. That run was wild and sometimes it pays off. And that's like always the exciting thing about Netrunner. You're going to get a credit back from Zahya. They're going to get a penny shaver credit. So their money is not awful. Here they can still red team archives and they will, which is a click for 4 credits across the penny shaver, which is good. We probably want to get something on archives because that's a pretty good click for our opponent. That being said, we probably can't. We just probably have to advance this and pass the turn. So they'll stabilize their economy, but who knows if they have more killers and who knows how easy it is for them to run this remote server. Here they access every card in archives. This takes a while sometimes. If you on the slow mode we're on, it's particularly slow, but they technically have to access all these cards. It just doesn't impact the game. All right, back to us. They have 3 cards in hand. They don't know whether we're drawing off the top of the deck. They are technically on game point because there's 2 more 3-pointers in the game. If they find those, it's going to be a problem. We found a seamless. That's actually super valuable because that means we can seamless advance this agenda and have a click left. We could probably use that click just to put like maybe a white space on archives. That might scare them. At the end of the day, they only break it for 1 credit, so it doesn't actually really slow them down, but they might not know that. I'd like a tithe on archives. I think it might make more sense that we do Spin Doctor first to draw new cards to see what we're drawing into and then spend our turn. Because if we draw another 4-2 agenda, we'll just put it into the remote server and probably try and win that turn after. So if we res the Spin Doctor gets trashed. Now, do I want to shuffle these cards back into our deck? No, I want to find an agenda. So I'm going to go ahead and just res the Spin Doctor, trashing the Spin Doctor. I will draw 2 cards. We found to send a message. Okay. So that's annoying because we can't score that next turn easily. Now, is it safer in this remote server than in HQ? I imagine it's actually safer in the remote server. That being said, if they find it, they win the game. The other option is we can just discard this card and have it in archives, and then our opponent has to run archives to get it shuffled back into R&D, which is not that hard because they're probably going to run archives anyways with red team, but that's the power of Spin Doctor. You can just get cards into archives back into the R&D. So what do we do here? If we do seamless advance, we gain 7 credits and we can add, well, a Spin Doctor back in theory. That's okay, but I don't want to score this out. I want to score out one of the 4 2s. We have 2 left in the deck because this is a lot harder to score out and we can't score it out next turn. Will they run HQ on sell? It'll be like a 1 in 6 for them to win the game on HQ. Those are not terrible odds. We haven't seen a Dawkins pass yet. That might come down or a jailbreak. I guess that's the worst case, but I think we'll just seamless launch this out and then try and, I don't know if they're going to run R&D for a bit. That ice is pretty good. We might just get something on archives. I really wish if we drew a 4-2 there, we'd actually be able to win in 2 turns, but sometimes it'd be like that. So we're going to play seamless launch. Just always advances the agenda. I wonder how it happens if you have multiple agendas, it might ask you. But technically, even if you have advanceable ice, it might ask you. So score that, gain 7. We're technically on 6 points, which is ugly because we're going to have to score to 8 or 9 points to win the game. And we can add a card back from the heap to our hand. Here we're going to do the seamless launch just because it's the easiest way that we can score out 5 3s or 4 2s without showing their 5 3s or 4 2s with advancements on the table. And we have a click left here. We can choose to discard the send a message, and then it'll go back into archives. And then if they run archives with red team, which they probably will, it'll go back into R&D. And I don't think I love that. I think it's a bit safer in HQ. So either we put something in the remote server to force them to run it, which maybe they will. I don't know if the AI is aware that they're on game point and they have to run anything we put in this remote server. But I don't know if they can run this remote server. If they click through the Brawn, they can't click through the on-sell, and that's going to be an issue for them. So they can't really run this remote server. If that's the case, we can send a message in the remote server and keep it safe there. And if we top deck a seamless launch, we can win next turn by doing seamless launch advance. I'm going to take that angle and hope that we top deck. There's 2 in 17 seamless launches. And I think this remote server is pretty safe because this, they have to click through a break. And for break, it's like 8 credits. This is 4 credits. And then they have to click through this. And then they still have to spend clicks for 5 credits for that. So we'll end our turn. Just checking the archives. If we had seamless launches in here, we would shuffle them back in with Spin Doctor before a mandatory draw. That is notably one of the weird things about Chiriboga is that it doesn't always give you access to every paid ability window. It'll offer you on some of the obvious ones, but you can always use Spin Doctor before you mandatory draw. I don't think Chiriboga lets you do that. Second red team. Technically, that is possible. It just overlaps really poorly because each red team says, make a run on the server you haven't run. So it's not like you can run archives twice. So that's Chiriboga technically. So the gain 4 here, running archives. Again, this is probably just a 5 credit hole and they just need their 5 credits because they have to run this remote server in the next turn or they lose. But they're doing okay. They technically want their killer for this remote server unless they can break this, click through this, break this, and pay 3 or pay 2 clicks, excuse me. Now in theory, they could like pay to break this for 8, pay to break this for 4, click through the on-sell, and then just like pay 5 for the mana garment. If they do that, they can win the game. Now, if we top deck a seamless launch, we win the game. Oh, that's frightening. Okay, that's not exactly what we wanted. So I think here we can afford to get another piece of ice on the server and advance the card once. So we want to keep as many cards in hand. So if they pivot HQ, our opponent, the bot, can't find the send a message. So if that's the case, we need to advance this once. We need to get ice on the remote server. I think Palisade's probably their best case because we spend 3, they spend 4. That's the best trade. Otherwise, it spends 6, they spend 8. And that might be a bit much. This is a better ice overall. Can we afford to do that? We might not want to because we need to res at least some of this ice on HQ. I think this is going to be good enough because that's 4 and that's expensive. This is expensive for us as well. We'll keep all the ice on the server. Then we'll advance this once, which we already did. And then we'll probably just click for a credit here. You could planogram to gain 3 credits. I think that's actually an important thing to keep in mind. But if we do that, them running HQ becomes a 1 in 5 to win the game as opposed to 1 in 6. And those are actually odds that matter. So I'm just going to click for a credit here. Again, to win the game, we need to res the Palisade. That's 3 credits. And then we need to score the send a message, which is 3 credits. So that's 6 credits, which means we have 4 credits to res ice on HQ. So I think we're just going to keep cards in hand. If we do the planogram, we have 7 credits, so we can technically res the on sell. So they probably only have 1 run on HQ. Actually, that's maybe fine. If we do the planogram, we go down to 13 credits, which means we can afford to res the on sell, and they only have 1 shot at 1 in 5. So we'll gain 3. All right, end the turn. They need to win this turn. So they largely need to run the remote server, find the 1 in 5 in HQ, send a message, or find the 1 send. Oh, that's it. Actually, there's no more send a messages, right? So they have to either steal 2 agendas on R&D and click 1, they're running HQ. This is what they need to do because they don't think they can run this remote server. And this is why we technically played the planogram so we can afford to res this and still score out. Yeah. Now this, they can't let the subroutines fire. So they have to click through it, which means they largely only get 1 run on HQ this turn, which is just strictly a 1 in 5. They have a 1 in 5 shot to win the game here. If we made it 1 in 6, they could have ran multiple times. I think this is overall better. So they'll continue. We can afford to res this white space, but it has no impact on the game because either they win this run or they lose this run. So we'll continue without resing ice. See if we get lucky or unlucky. Continue success. I'm not nervous. Red team. They hit the bronze. Okay, huge. Still exciting. Like Netrunner's kind of sick. So they see 1 card, they get the red team, they get their penny shaver. And unfortunately though, that is the end of their turn and also the end of their game. So next turn we do seamless launch, advance, scoring out to a whopping, what is it? 9 points. Oh, we top deck the second seamless, sick. So we'll play seamless, we'll advance. In theory, we could play the second seamless for like style. And of course we'll score this out. Awesome. Now technically it's asking us to res ice and do PD, but the game is over before any of those trigger, which is a weird little technicality. Now, of course, I want to give a huge thank you to Bob the Uberfish for putting together Chiriboga. It's been around for a while and it keeps updating it, right? With the added system update 2021. That is incredible. And just getting a functional AI that can play a game and nearly win a game in Netrunner is absolutely incredible. Now, this is a nice place for you to get some games in, to get some comfort with Netrunner. It is a fantastic source for that. But I want to be very clear. As soon as you can, as soon as you're feeling comfortable making that daunting jump into playing on Jinteki.net, getting involved in Discord servers, going out to your friendly local game store and meeting people and participating in organized play, it is incredible. The Netrunner community is something like I've never seen before. And if you're a new player and you're worried, everyone you're going to meet is going to be welcoming and supporting 100% of the time. It is just something else. And this game absolutely explodes and you get to see so much of what makes it fantastic by just playing against other folks. So do keep that in mind. This is amazing. It's a great tool, but playing against real people is just kind of the beginning. It is something else. And with that, thanks so much for watching. Check out Chiriboga. The link is in the description. And of course, see you in the next one. Ciao. Yay, thanks so much for watching. Hopefully you enjoyed that. I think not enough people know that Chiriboga exists, which you probably should know it exists. It's an absolutely incredible tool that someone clearly put a lot of effort into. If you want to get some reps into the game, figure out system gateway, even check out system update. It is absolutely fantastic. Now, I'll be honest, I was a bit nervous about doing a Chiriboga episode, and that's because there's 2 big caveats to always say alongside Chiriboga, and I think I did say these already in the video. But firstly, you got to watch out. The fact that Chiriboga exists and can play a coherent game of Netrunner is absolutely incredible. That's such a hard problem to tackle, and Bob did an incredible job. But the more you play, the more you realize that the bot has its weaknesses, and it doesn't exactly play like a human player will. So while it's good to be able to beat Chiriboga, to win games against Chiriboga, that feels good. You just got to watch out that you're not training yourself in a way that's not representative of how a human player plays. The more you play Chiriboga, you'll learn what that means, but do keep that in mind. And secondly, if you use Chiriboga as a way to play Netrunner, that's phenomenal, but I'm just hoping it is not the thing that replaces that sort of daunting jump to go out and meet people on Jinteki.net or go out and play people at your local friendly game store. Netrunner is a fantastic game, but the community around Netrunner is even more fantastic. And getting involved with that, you'll learn there's just so many people that want to help you get into the game and get more out of the game. The Netrunner community is incredible, and playing only against a robot, I feel kind of sad about that. It just feels lonely. There's a lot of great stuff. Go out and lose a couple games against some nice strangers at your local game store. I promise you won't regret it. I want to say a huge thank you to all these names here and more that help support the Métropole Grid on Patreon. Gives me the ability and the time to do all the video editing, the live streaming, the motion graphics, all the sort of stuff that goes on here. This channel just simply wouldn't be the way it is without all these names here, and of course, all our daily cast patrons. If you want to support Netrunner content like this, you can find the link in the description. Just take a second to like the video also. That helps a heck of a lot. And with that, we'll be back in a bit. We might take a bit of a break. There is the holidays coming out, so there will be no live streams next week, I think is what it comes down to. Hopefully you don't mind, but we'll be back in the new year for sure. We'll try and get some more video stuff up here. But thank you so much for watching, and we'll see you in a bit. Ciao.